police dogs unleashed on a mother, until they remembered who she was. The rain beat down harder as Maya quickened her steps, Elijah's cries muffled against her chest. She had seen those headlights before. She knew the feeling of being marked, of being watched. But tonight, there was no escape. 2 cruisers blocking her path, boots slamming into puddles, hands resting on weapons. And then, the order she feared most, the canine door swinging open. The shepherd lunged forward, straining against its leash, snarling with a hunger that made onlookers flinch. The officers smirked, certain she would crumble. But in that instant, Maya's body remembered. Sandstorms, helicopters, the heat of battle, commands shouted in German over the chaos of war. She wasn't just a mother clutching her child. She had once been a Marine, a combat medic, a handler of war dogs who saved lives when men couldn't. The officers thought she was powerless. They couldn't have been more wrong. The rain had come early that evening, rolling down from the Green Mountains like a grey curtain, swallowing the streets of Maple Hollow in a steady, relentless downpour. The town, small and usually so familiar, looked different under the storm. Street lamps blurred halos of light through the mist. Roofs glistened like the backs of dark fish, and gutters gurgled with runoff that rushed toward the river. The place that prided itself on calm. White porches, polite nods across picket fences, children riding bikes until the first fireflies appeared, now looked as though it was holding its breath. On the sidewalk, her hair plastered to her forehead beneath the hood of a thin jacket, Maya Thompson pressed forward. One arm cradled a bundle of faded blankets, the soft, uneven breaths of her newborn son warming her collarbone. The blanket was too thin for a night like this. The wind cut through its fabric, and she drew Elijah closer, her own body becoming the shield that cloth could not be. Every few steps she bent her head, whispering softly into the damp cocoon, "Almost home, baby. Just a little longer." Her boots splashed in shallow puddles, and though the streets were nearly empty, she felt watched. Curtains shifted in darkened windows. Porch lights flicked on just long enough for someone to peer out, then flicked off again. It wasn't just the rain or the cold that tightened her chest. It was the weight of eyes, of judgment wrapped in silence. She had lived here only a year, long enough for neighbors to know her face, but not her story. To them, she was the quiet black woman at the edge of town, the one who kept to herself, who carried scars in her eyes but never spoke of them. But those scars were real. Hidden under her jacket sleeve was the faint line of shrapnel that had torn her arm open in Fallujah. Beneath her ribs was the ache of nights spent hunched in bunkers, listening to mortars split the desert sky. Her back still stiffened whenever helicopters passed overhead. She had been a Marine once, a combat medic, a handler of dogs trained to charge into places where men faltered. Yet here, in Maple Hollow, those years felt erased. Her uniform packed away in a trunk, her service reduced to a line in some forgotten file. Lightning rippled across the clouds, turning the wet pavement silver for a heartbeat. Elijah stirred, tiny fists pressing against the blanket, a soft whimper escaping his lips. Maya's heart clenched. She adjusted her grip, rocking him gently as she walked. Behind her, from somewhere deeper in the neighborhood, came the faint sound of laughter. Sharp, distant, and quickly swallowed by the storm. She imagined it was nothing more than boys cutting through backyards, but still her pace quickened. The air tonight carried an edge, the way the desert sometimes had before an ambush. Heavy, thick, pressing down on her chest until each breath was an effort. She turned a corner, her sneakers skidding slightly on the slick pavement, and pulled her hood tighter. A neon sign buzzed weakly outside the shuttered pharmacy. Rain hammered the awning, pooling into an overflowing gutter that dumped water onto the sidewalk like a broken faucet. She crossed the street, careful not to jostle Elijah, and headed toward the narrow row of homes that lined the south end of town. For a moment she dared to imagine slipping inside her small rented apartment, peeling off the soaked jacket, warming Elijah by the radiator, and breathing, just breathing without fear. But the comfort of that picture was fragile, easily shattered. Because beneath her exhaustion, beneath the ache in her arms and the sting of rain in her eyes, lay a feeling she couldn't shake. Something was coming, and she wasn't wrong. As she passed under the next streetlight, its glow trembling in the storm, she noticed movement in the puddles behind her, the reflection of headlights turning slowly onto the street. A car, heavy tires hissing through water. She kept walking, forcing herself not to look back. The hum of the engine grew louder. Elijah whimpered again, sensing her tension. She kissed the crown of his damp head and whispered, "Shh, Mama's here." The cruiser crept closer, light bars muted but unmistakable in the storm. Maya's shoulders tightened. Her steps slowed, then quickened again, the rhythm uneven. She had been in situations where silence meant survival, where every choice of movement carried the weight of life or death. That training stirred now. Though this was no battlefield, this was supposed to be home. And yet tonight, home felt more dangerous than the desert had ever been. The hum of the engine behind her grew louder, cutting through the rain's steady percussion. Maya didn't turn around at first. Years of military service had taught her the value of patience, of listening to the world before reacting. But every part of her body knew. The headlights in the puddles weren't just any car. The slow crawl, the deliberate pace. It was law enforcement. Her shoulders stiffened, the way they once had when she crouched in alleys overseas, waiting for the unknown to reveal itself. She glanced down at Elijah, bundled tight against her chest. His tiny lips puckered, a whimper escaping, as if he could feel the dread tightening around her. She kissed the damp crown of his head and whispered, "Easy now. Mama's here. Just breathe." The cruiser edged closer. Its headlights washed over her back, stretching her shadow long across the slick pavement. Then came the second one, from the opposite direction. Tires hissed through puddles as it nosed in from a side street and cut across her path. Her heart lurched, one behind, one ahead. For a moment, the storm itself seemed to hush, as though waiting. Maya stopped walking. Her boots rooted to the pavement. She shifted her stance, instinctively widening her feet the way she used to when bracing for orders. Rain streamed from her hood, stinging her eyes. The first door creaked open, then the second. Two officers stepped out into the rain. Their heavy boots splashed into waterlogged asphalt, dark uniforms shining under the streetlights. They moved with the practiced ease of men who believed control was theirs before they even spoke. Their hands hovered close to their belts, not drawing, not yet, but prepared. Maya felt her throat tighten. She hadn't broken any law. She wasn't fleeing from anything. But none of that mattered. To them, her very presence was enough. A black woman walking alone at night, clutching a baby. They didn't need more reason than that. Her mind whispered the same phrase she'd once repeated to young soldiers in the desert. Stay calm, stay small, don't give them an excuse. One officer adjusted his cap, his gaze sweeping over her with the cold detachment of a man reading a target sheet. "Evening," he said, though his tone carried no courtesy. It was a warning dressed as a greeting. Maya opened her mouth, meaning to explain. Clinic visit, baby restless, just heading home. But the words stuck. Her pulse thundered too loudly, and the rain pounded too hard. She took a shallow breath and managed a nod. Elijah whimpered again, a soft cry that rose and fell against her chest. She rocked him gently, but the sound seemed to irritate the officer, his jaw tightening, as if the baby's cry was an inconvenience rather than a plea for warmth. The second officer circled slightly, boots sloshing, positioning himself at her flank. She noticed it instantly, the maneuver of a man trained to corner. Her spine straightened, every nerve sharpened, the habits of military drills rushing back. She remembered being told to read every detail, the weight of their stance, the twitch of a finger, the angle of an elbow. Know them before they know you. But this wasn't a briefing room in Camp Pendleton. This was Maple Hollow, Vermont, a town she had chosen for its quiet, its promise of safety. And yet here she was, boxed in like an enemy. "Step aside, ma'am," the first officer said, his voice firmer now. The rain slicked his cheeks, drops rolling down his jawline like sweat. "We just need to ask you a few questions." Her arms tightened around Elijah instinctively. His small fists pressed against the blanket, his face scrunching as a tiny wail broke free. Maya rocked him harder, murmuring, "Shh, baby, stay with me, stay with me." The sound of her own voice calmed her as much as it calmed him. She drew another breath, her body still as stone despite the pounding storm. "I'm just trying to get home," she said at last, her words barely audible over the rain. The officer didn't move. His partner smirked faintly, as if the explanation amused him. Neither looked at her son. Neither saw a mother, exhausted and soaked, fighting only for the warmth of a child. They saw something else. And Maya saw it too, in their narrowed eyes, in the deliberate spread of their boots, suspicion where none was deserved. Authority pressed down because they could, not because it was needed. Her training screamed warnings inside her skull. The pounding rain became the pounding of helicopters. The flash of headlights became muzzle flashes. The hiss of tires became the roar of desert wind. She had been here before, in another form, another place, surrounded, judged, threatened. She blinked hard, forcing the memories back. This wasn't Fallujah. This wasn't a raid. This was supposed to be home. But her body didn't care about the difference. Her body knew danger. Her arms pulled Elijah tighter, shielding him as though bullets might fall with the rain. She shifted her weight again, grounding herself, the old Marine inside her clawing its way to the surface. The officer tilted his head slightly, a signal. She recognized it immediately. It wasn't for her. It was for his partner. And in that instant, Maya's skin prickled with dread. Something was coming. She couldn't yet see it, but the rhythm was the same she had felt before the breach of a door, before the snap of a tripwire. The storm thickened, thunder rolling overhead, the smell of wet asphalt sharp in her lungs. Elijah whimpered again, and her heart broke at the sound. She kissed his forehead, whispering into his damp curls, "I've got you, no matter what." The officers stood unmoving, rain dripping from their hats, suspicion etched deeper with each passing second. And then one of them shifted his stance, turning slightly toward the cruiser behind her. His hand rose in a casual wave, the kind of wave that opened cages. The officer's hand lifted in that casual, dismissive wave, a motion that would mean little to anyone else, but Maya felt it like a blade sliding out of its sheath. Her breath hitched. She had seen this before, in deserts halfway across the world, the subtle gesture before soldiers released their dogs into alleys heavy with gunpowder and fear. The rear door of the cruiser clicked. The sound was small, almost lost in the storm, but to Maya it boomed louder than thunder. The metal swung wide. From the shadows inside, a shape moved. Low, deliberate, coiled with power. Then the creature stepped into the rain. The German shepherd emerged, its coat slick from the damp, its body taut as if carved from stone. The leash strained against the officer's fist, muscles rippling beneath fur darkened by water. A guttural growl rumbled from its chest, vibrating through the night like the warning of a predator that had already chosen its prey. Rain dripped from the dog's muzzle, each bead catching the glow of the headlights before falling into the puddles below. Its ears were rigid, its teeth bared in a flash of white. The eyes, amber, sharp, unyielding, locked on her with an intensity that made the world narrow to a tunnel. Maya's throat tightened. Her arms clutched Elijah closer, shielding his tiny body with her own. His small fists pressed against the blanket, his cries muffled but insistent, trembling in rhythm with the storm. She rocked him, whispering soft, nonsense words, though her own heart was hammering so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. The officer holding the leash smirked, mistaking her stillness for fear. He jerked the strap once, hard, and the shepherd lunged forward, paws slapping against wet pavement, growl ripping louder through the night. Maya didn't move. Couldn't. Every nerve inside her was alive, electricity surging through veins that remembered too much. Her mind snapped backward, to the heat of Iraq, the dust that stung her lungs, the way dogs like this one had been her allies in chaos. She remembered their strength, their precision, the way they trusted a handler's hand more than the roar of gunfire. This wasn't just a dog, it was a soldier in fur, and she knew its language. The rain poured heavier, beating down on her hood, streaking into her eyes, blurring the sight of the officers who loomed with suspicion in their gaze. But she saw the dog clearly. Every detail, the twitch in its shoulders, the stiffness in its tail, the confusion in its gaze when her eyes met its own. It recognized something. For a fleeting second, Maya forgot the men with badges, forgot the flashing lights, forgot the weight of prejudice pressing against her skin. It was just her and the shepherd. And in that silent exchange, buried beneath years of training and command, a flicker of recognition passed. The officers didn't see it. They couldn't. To them, she was just a mother about to be subdued. One barked orders, his voice slicing through the storm. "On your knees! Now!" Elijah wailed at the sharpness of the sound, and Maya's chest burned with fury. She bent her head close to his, shielding him tighter, whispering promises he couldn't yet understand. "You're safe. I'll never let them hurt you." The shepherd's growl rose, but its steps faltered. The leash trembled between obedience and hesitation. The handler yanked again, water splashing up from the asphalt. "Get her down!" another officer shouted, rage layered over fear. Maya's muscles trembled, not with weakness, but with the familiar surge of adrenaline that once kept her alive in firefights. Every instinct told her to collapse, to protect Elijah with her body, to let the storm swallow them both. But another instinct, older, sharper, buried deep in marrow and muscle memory, refused. She had not broken in Fallujah. She had not broken in Helmand. She would not break here, not in front of her son. The shepherd snarled again, eyes never leaving hers. Its breath steamed in the cold night, rising like smoke, rain dripping steadily from its muzzle. The sound wasn't just threat. It was confusion. Maya could feel it. The conflict inside the animal was as clear as thunder. The clash between past and present had begun. Maya's lips parted, though no words came yet. Her hand, The one not clutching Elijah twitched slightly at her side, fingers curling in a motion so subtle it could have been mistaken for fear. But it wasn't fear. It was command. The storm roared, the officers shouted, but in that narrow silence between handler and dog, Maya knew. This was the beginning. And nothing, not the rain, not the men with badges, not the weight of suspicion, would stop what was about to unfold. The rain beating down on Maple Hollow blurred into something else inside Maya's mind. A different storm. A storm of sand and fire from years ago. Her eyes, locked on the German shepherd before her, saw not the small-town street, nor the flashing blue lights, but the endless ochre horizon of Iraq. The present melted, and the past surged forward. She had been only 21 when the Marines sent her across the ocean, a combat medic, a lifeline for men who walked into places they knew they might not return from. And from her first day in country, she learned quickly that she wasn't alone. The dogs were there too. Massive German shepherds and Belgian Malinois, their coats dusty and sunburnt from patrols. They moved through desert ruins with an ease the soldiers envied, their noses detecting death long before it arrived. Mines, IEDs, traps hidden in rubble. And when gunfire erupted, they didn't flinch. They surged forward, soldiers in fur, tethered by loyalty more than by leash. Maya still remembered the first time she trained beside one. The base camp was nothing but rows of tents, sagging under desert heat, the air sharp with the smell of diesel fuel and sweat. She stood in line with other medics, helmet crooked on her head, rifle slung awkwardly at her side. Across from them, handlers snapped crisp commands in German, and the dogs obeyed instantly. "Sitz!" one barked, and the shepherd sat, muscles taut, eyes never leaving its target. "Fass!" came next, and in a blink the dog launched, clamping down on the padded arm of a trainer, dragging him to the ground. Dust exploded around them. Soldiers cheered, half in awe, half in fear. Maya had flinched at the ferocity, but then she saw the release. A single sharp order, and the dog let go, standing proud, chest heaving, eyes burning with focus. No malice. No cruelty. Just discipline. It was in that moment she understood. These weren't beasts. They were comrades. Weeks later, she found herself crouched behind a crumbling wall in Fallujah, her uniform soaked with another man's blood. A young private had taken shrapnel to the leg, the wound gushing, his face ghostly pale. Maya's hand shook as she worked, the roar of distant gunfire rattling the ground. She thought they were finished, until she felt the brush of fur at her side. It was a shepherd named Rocco, jaws still flecked with dust, his handler shouting commands somewhere beyond the alley. The dog pressed close, shielding her with his bulk as she wrapped the bandage. Bullets cracked overhead, but Rocco didn't move. His head swiveled, ears high, guarding her like she was part of his pack. She had whispered then, without thinking, "Good boy, Halton." A word she'd picked up from training. His ears flicked at the sound, as if he understood. And in that instant, she didn't feel alone. And the war gave her memories carved deep, sandstorms that blinded, helicopters thundering overhead, heat so oppressive it peeled skin from bone. But it also gave her these animals, their amber eyes cutting through chaos, their loyalty a rope that pulled her back from despair. She remembered one night especially, a patrol outside Ramadi, the air so dry it scraped her lungs raw. They were moving through an abandoned neighborhood when the dog halted, body rigid, ears forward. The handler froze, raised a fist. The squad stopped cold. Seconds later, the IED detonated 20 yards ahead. The blast lit the sky, a thunderclap of fire and shrapnel. If not for that dog, if not for his senses honed beyond human comprehension, half the squad would have been gone. Maya had knelt afterward, dust caking her lips, adrenaline still clawing her chest. She reached for the dog, scratched behind his ears with a trembling hand. He leaned into her touch, steady, as if telling her, "You live because I saw what you could not." Those moments had imprinted themselves deeper than scars. She carried them even now, years later, standing on a rain-slicked street with her son in her arms. Every growl, every twitch of muscle in the shepherd before her tonight mirrored the comrades she had once trusted with her life. The officers saw a weapon straining against a leash. Maya saw a soldier. She blinked hard, the desert fading, the storm of Maple Hollow rushing back in. Rain pounded her hood. Elijah whimpered softly, pulling her to the present. She rocked him gently, but her eyes never left the dog, because she knew, as surely as she had known in Fallujah, that this animal was more than the men who claimed to command it. And somewhere in the space between its growl and her memory, she felt the thread tightening, ready to snap the past into the present. The rain on Maple Hollow's streets became the percussion of memory, each drop a drumbeat pulling Maya back to a night she had never escaped. It was in Helmand Province, on a mission that was supposed to be routine. She had gone out with her unit, dust clinging to their boots, air heavy with the metallic tang of tension. At her side walked Corporal Daniel Reeves, the medic she had leaned on since her first deployment. They shared everything. The jokes whispered under starlight, the rations traded in silence, the burden of patching up bodies torn apart by an invisible enemy. Reeves had been more than a comrade. He had been a brother. That night, the dogs were restless. Their ears twitched at every shadow. Their noses dipped low to the sand. Maya felt it too, a tightness under her ribs she couldn't shake. Reeves had nudged her with an elbow and whispered, "Don't overthink it. We've done this 100 times. But then the world exploded. The IED tore open the earth, fire and shrapnel ripping through darkness. Maya remembered the deafening crack, the shockwave that threw her to the ground. When her ears stopped ringing, all she heard was screaming. Not her own, but Reeves. She crawled through dust and smoke, her hands bloody, vision blurred. Reeves lay crumpled, his leg mangled beyond recognition. She pressed her palms to the wound, desperate, whispering through clenched teeth, "Stay with me. You stay with me." The shepherd nearby whined, pacing, its handler shouting commands. Maya couldn't hear over her own heartbeat. She worked furiously, bandages slipping in the blood, her mind screaming against the truth her eyes already knew. Reeves's grip found her wrist, weak but certain. His lips moved. "Don't let it take you." Then his hand fell away. The desert seemed to collapse into silence. Maya stayed there long after the squad moved on, long after the medevac came. The sand beneath her knees turned black with blood, and no matter how hard she scrubbed, she never got it out of her skin. That night never left her. Not in the years that followed, not in the quiet of Maple Hollow. She carried Reeves's voice inside her chest like a broken compass, a warning, a plea, a reminder. When her service ended, Maya came home to a country that had already forgotten her. Her uniform went into a trunk at the foot of a bed she couldn't sleep in. The medals, still gleaming, felt like mockery. The world moved on, while she walked its streets as though half of her had been buried in foreign sand. She tried to find work, filled out applications with trembling hands, listing her experience in trauma care, her years in the field, but each interview ended the same. Employers glanced at the box checked veteran, at the note that she was a single mother now, and their smiles faltered. "We'll be in touch." They never were. Sometimes they didn't bother to hide the suspicion. "We're not sure this is the right environment for someone with your background." The words stung more than bullets, as though her service was a liability, as though the discipline that had kept men alive was irrelevant here. She took what she could, cleaning houses, stocking shelves at night, when Elijah was still in her belly. The world did not see a Marine. It saw only a woman too tired to complain, too desperate to keep going. Discrimination wrapped itself around her like chains. At the grocery store, strangers whispered when she paid with vouchers. At the clinic, a nurse looked at her with pity that cut deeper than cruelty. Every rejection, every door closed, pressed Reeves's last words harder into her chest. "Don't let it take you." So she learned to say nothing. Her neighbors in Maple Hollow never knew who she had been. They saw her as quiet, private, maybe strange. They waved politely, then whispered when she passed. None of them knew that her body bore scars from shrapnel, that her nights were haunted by sandstorms and screams, that she had once held dying men in her arms and whispered them into silence. She kept her history folded into herself, like those discharge papers tucked in a box at the back of her closet. To speak it aloud felt dangerous, as if the world would laugh, or worse, look at her with that same pity. And so she walked each day with her head lowered, carrying Elijah in silence. Her son became the only piece of her life untouched by war, the one soul who would never look at her with suspicion. But on this storm-soaked night, boxed in by headlights and hostile eyes, the silence she had carried for years pressed down heavier than the rain. The officers didn't know her story, just as her neighbors didn't. To them she was faceless, nameless, another woman to be subdued. Yet inside her burned the memories of Reeves, the loyalty of the dogs, the bitterness of rejection, and the weight of battles fought both abroad and at home. She was no stranger to storms. She had walked through worse than this, and though the world might never know it, she had survived. War had taught Maya the sound of silence, not the peace of it, but the suffocating kind, the silence that came after explosions, when smoke drifted and the world held its breath, waiting to see who had survived. She remembered crouching in ruins, her hands slick with blood, praying the next shot wasn't meant for her. That silence was heavy. It pressed against the chest, forced shallow breaths, reminded you how close death could creep. Motherhood carried its own silence. The hush of Elijah's breathing in the middle of the night, the way his tiny chest rose and fell against her skin. The quiet of a nursery at dawn, soft light brushing over his face as she rocked him, humming songs her mother once sang to her. This silence was different. It didn't crush, it healed. But both silences left her trembling. Both demanded everything she had to give. Maya often thought of the irony. She had gone to war armed with tourniquets, morphine, and grit, fighting to keep grown men alive. Now she fought each day with bottles, diapers, and lullabies, guarding a life too fragile to even hold up his own head. The battlefields looked different, but the weight on her shoulders felt the same. If she faltered, someone else would pay the price. Elijah had become her anchor. When the nightmares came, dragging her back to the desert, his soft cries pulled her out. When rejection letters piled up, when whispers in town cut like blades, the curve of his tiny smile kept her from shattering. He was her proof that love could grow out of loss, that something pure could survive even in the aftermath of war. Yet tonight, under the rain of Maple Hollow, she felt those two worlds colliding. The storm soaked through her hood, plastered her hair to her temples. The German shepherd's growl sliced through the night, dragging memories of military drills into the present. Her arms tightened around Elijah, feeling the tremor of his whimpers, the fragile heartbeat pulsing against her ribs. She had once crouched behind walls with comrades, whispering to dogs trained to run toward danger. Now she crouched again, but it was not bullets she feared. It was the suspicion in men's eyes, the prejudice wrapped in authority, the threat of leashes snapping free. The battlefield and the nursery had merged into one. Her mind replayed it cruelly. Reeves' lifeless hand slipping from hers, followed by Elijah's newborn fingers curling tight around her pinky the day he was born. One had slipped away, the other held on. She had lost a brother, gained a son. Both moments branded her heart with the knowledge that love always came with risk. And that was the weight she carried. It was not just her life she guarded anymore. Every step, every breath, every choice carried Elijah inside it. If she stumbled, if she broke, the world would not just swallow her. It would swallow him too. The responsibility was crushing, but it was also the only thing keeping her upright. Lightning flashed, throwing shadows across the wet pavement. In that blinding moment, she imagined the war and the present overlapping. Rubble and rain, helicopters and cruisers, snarling dogs and a baby's cries. She felt the same adrenaline surge, the same instinct to survive at all costs. But she was not the same woman she had been in uniform. Back then, she had been willing to risk herself for the mission, to bleed so others could live. Tonight the mission was narrower, fiercer. Protect Elijah. No medals, no orders. Just a mother's vow carved deeper than any oath she'd ever sworn in the Marines. She whispered into the blanket, words lost in the storm. I'll get you home, no matter what. The shepherd's growl deepened, leash straining as the officer tugged it forward. Maya's pulse thundered, but her grip on Elijah steadied. She could feel his warmth against her chest, fragile but insistent. He was alive. He needed her, and she would not let Maple Hollow become his battlefield. For years, she had carried silence, never telling neighbors who she truly was. She had kept her past folded tight, believing it was safer that way. But tonight, she felt that silence tearing open. The soldiers she had lost, the dogs she had commanded, the battles she had fought, all of it surged forward, colliding with the life she had built as Elijah's mother. And as the storm howled around her, Maya realized something with startling clarity. She could no longer separate the soldier from the mother. They were the same. The discipline, the scars, the fire inside her chest. They had all been reshaped into the shield she now carried for her son. The battlefield had followed her home, but so had her strength. She lifted her head, rain dripping from her chin, eyes burning as they locked once more with the shepherd's. In its gaze, she saw the reflection of who she was, a soldier, a mother, a survivor, caught between two worlds, but refusing to surrender in either. And in that moment, she knew, tonight was not just about enduring. Tonight was about proving, to herself and to the child in her arms, that she could carry the weight of both. The officer jerked the leash, and the German shepherd surged forward with a feral snarl, jaws glinting white in the storm. For a split second, the blur of motion was all Maya saw, the muscles coiling, the flash of teeth, the spray of water as paws struck pavement. Elijah let out a shrill cry against her chest. Instinct took hold. Maya dropped to one knee, her body folding protectively over him, every movement sharp with muscle memory honed years ago. She curved her shoulders, creating a shield of flesh and bone around her son. Her left arm wrapped him tighter, pressing his small body into the safety of her chest, while her right hand shot up, not wildly, not in panic, but with precision. The signal was subtle. A flat palm angled just so, fingers stiff, wrist locked. A motion burned into her after months of training military dogs under the desert sun. A motion that still lived in her bones even after years of silence. The shepherd skidded to a halt. Water splashed high as its claws scraped against wet asphalt, stopping inches from her arm. Its growl deepened, vibrating through the storm, but confusion flickered across its face. Its head cocked slightly, ears twitching. Its chest heaved with the force of restraint, torn between two worlds. The handlers shouted command, and the ghost of another voice, another presence, etched into its instincts. "Attack!" the officer bellowed, spit flying from his lips. He yanked the leash again, his boots digging into puddles. The shepherd's body surged forward a few inches, but its paws shuffled awkwardly, uncertain. Its eyes were locked, not on the officer, but on Maya. Her pulse thundered. She could smell the dog's hot breath mingling with rain, could feel the vibration of its growl through the ground beneath her knee. Elijah sobbed softly, his tiny fist trembling against her chest, but Maya did not flinch. She held the dog's gaze, steady, commanding, the way she had once held the gaze of soldiers bleeding out under her hands, the way she had once calmed beasts trained to hunt insurgents in the alleys of Ramadi. Her hand never wavered. Her voice, though barely louder than a whisper, carried the tone that had once steadied chaos. "Aus." The words slipped from her lips in a low, firm register, almost drowned by the storm. A single German command. The shepherd froze. Its ears flicked back. The growl wavered, not ending, but faltering. Confusion rippled through its stance. The officers shouted again, louder this time. Their boots splashed closer, their fury sharp. "What the hell are you waiting for? Take her down!" The leash trembled, taut as wire, but the dog's amber eyes stayed fixed on Maya. She could see the recognition there, faint but undeniable, as if some ancient memory stirred, a recognition of authority not carried in uniform or badge, but in tone, in presence, in the invisible bond between handler and hound. The storm howled around them, lightning slashing the sky, thunder rolling so loud it rattled windows. But in that circle of rain, silence reigned. A silence alive with tension, with the clash of command. Maya's knees dug into the pavement, water soaking through her jeans, but she didn't move. She couldn't. She knew the fragility of this moment, knew how easily the balance could tip. She tightened her grip on Elijah, feeling his warmth beneath the damp blanket, and willed her own heartbeat to steady. The shepherd's chest heaved. It gave a low, guttural whine, caught between duty and instinct. Its body leaned forward, muscles taut, but its paws stayed rooted, claws scraping uselessly against asphalt. Maya's hand remained raised, unshaken, rain dripping from her fingertips like blood once had in another life. She whispered again, firmer this time, her tone threading through the chaos. "Aus. Zurück." The words rolled from her tongue like they had years ago, in training fields choked with sand. And the shepherd, drenched, trembling, snarling, shifted, its head lowered by an inch. The tension in its shoulders quivered. The leash slackened slightly. The officer swore, rage boiling. He yanked harder, nearly losing his balance on the slick street. "Goddamn dog! Move!" But the shepherd did not. Its growl was no longer aimed at Maya. It rumbled like an old instinct resisting the wrong master. In that frozen tableau, Maya felt the war pressing against the night. She felt Reeves's voice in her chest. The sand, the blood, the bond she had forged with soldiers who had no words. She felt the years of silence she had carried, her neighbors never knowing, her child never seeing, breaking open in this moment. Her past and her present had collided. And though her body shook, her will did not. The shepherd blinked slowly, rain dripping from its lashes. Its eyes softened, only slightly, but enough. Enough to tell her that something buried deep still recognized her authority. For the first time, the officer's voice faltered. His command cracked, frustration spilling into fear. "What the hell is wrong with this dog?" Maya didn't answer. She couldn't. All her energy was locked on the shepherd, on the invisible thread stretched tight between them. Her son whimpered softly against her chest, and she pressed her lips to his damp forehead. "Hold steady, just hold steady." And the dog did. The clash was not yet over. She knew this was only the beginning. But for that one fragile moment, on that rain-slick street, Maya had not broken. She had stood, even on her knees, as both soldier and mother. And the German shepherd had listened. For a heartbeat, the storm itself seemed to pause. The German shepherd stood only a breath away from Maya, its chest heaving, muscles taut with the urge to obey, the leash yanked by the officer behind it. But its eyes, sharp amber, glowing beneath the rain, were fixed on her. Maya did not look away. She knew better than most how dangerous that gaze could be. A dog like this, trained for years, could read hesitation like blood in the water. To flinch, to break eye contact, would be to cede control. She had taught that lesson to new recruits in the desert, had drilled into them the power of confidence. And now, she called on it again. Her pulse thundered, her knees stung against the soaked pavement, and Elijah whimpered against her chest. Still, Maya held the shepherd's gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, only recognition. For the briefest moment, something flickered in the dog's expression. Its growl dropped half a note, the vibration shifting from pure aggression to uncertainty. Its ears twitched, tail rigid but trembling. Maya's lips parted, and in a voice steady but low, she whispered a single word. "Ruhig." The German syllable rolled out soft and firm, the same tone she had once used in a desert compound with sand stinging her face, calming a dog that had nearly torn through a medic's arm in panic. The shepherd's head lowered an inch, its ears tipped back, just slightly. Rain streamed from its muzzle, dripping onto her knee. The growl softened into a heavy breath, steam curling in the night air. Maya exhaled slowly. Relief flooded her chest, but she didn't allow it to show. She couldn't. The balance was too fragile. A thread stretched thin between command and obedience. Behind her, the handler shouted, voice cracking with authority pushed toward desperation. "Don't you stop. You hear me? Bite." The dog stiffened, pulled by the leash, torn by the conflict between the voice behind and the presence before. Its claws scraped against the pavement, paws sliding half an inch forward. Maya's hand rose higher, palm flat, steady, despite the tremor racing through her veins. She whispered again, quieter this time, so soft, it was almost prayer. "You know me." Her tone was not forceful. It was coaxing, reminding, awakening something buried in the shepherd's training. And somehow, impossibly, the dog responded. Its head dipped further. The tension in its shoulders eased. The leash sagged, slack against the handler's furious tug. The officer cursed loudly, boots splashing as he stepped closer. His partner moved in too, rage flashing across both faces, unwilling to accept what they were seeing. "Get on your knees, lady, now," one barked. "Make the dog move," the other yelled, jerking the leash so hard the shepherd yelped, then growled again. But the growl wasn't aimed at Maya. It wasn't even aimed at Elijah's muffled cries. It was directed sideways, back toward the men, straining to control it. Maya's heart pounded at the shift. She knew how delicate the line was. One wrong move, one broken note in her voice, and the fragile recognition could snap. But she leaned into the moment, every fiber of her soldier's discipline tightening like wire. The rain blurred everything else. The officers' boots sloshing, the harsh bark of their orders, the flash of their hands near weapons. All of it faded into background noise. Only the dog mattered now. Only the unspoken connection. Handler to hound, soul to soul. She lowered her hand slightly, her palm still firm, fingers spread wide in the universal signal of command. Her lips brushed Elijah's damp forehead as she whispered again, voice meant only for the shepherd. "Good boy. You're safe." The dog blinked slowly, raindrops clinging to its lashes. Its head dropped lower, no longer a predator ready to strike, but a soldier waiting for orders. The breath spilling from its mouth was no longer a growl, but a heavy pant. The officers, drenched and furious, couldn't comprehend it. Their shouts grew louder, more insistent, trying to reassert control. But the harder they barked, the more their authority crumbled. Maya didn't need to look at them to know. She could hear it in their voices, the crack of disbelief, the edge of panic creeping beneath their fury. Men who had thought themselves in command were losing it, not to violence, but to silence, to a connection they could neither see nor understand. Elijah whimpered again, his tiny fists trembling against her collarbone. Maya kissed him once more, eyes never leaving the shepherd's. Her voice, steady as stone, threaded through the storm. "Stay." And the dog did. For that fragile, rain-soaked moment, Maya felt the impossible. Control had shifted. Not to her entirely, not yet, but away from the officers who had believed fear would rule the night. Her past had risen, colliding with her present. And the shepherd, soldier of another kind, had recognized it. The silence that followed was not peace. It was defiance. Heavy, unnatural, crackling against the storm like static. The German shepherd sat rigid in front of Maya, chest heaving, its eyes fixed on her as though awaiting her command instead of the leash that jerked violently behind it. The officers couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. "God damn it," the handler spat, yanking the strap so hard the dog coughed against the choke collar. "What's wrong with this mutt?" His voice cracked, the steady confidence of authority bleeding into frustration. The other officer stepped forward, rain dripping from his cap brim, fury etched across his face. "You're losing him. Get him under control." "I am in control," the handler snapped back, but his voice betrayed the lie. His knuckles whitened on the leash, veins bulging in his forearm. The shepherd gave a low growl, not at Maya, but at the force pulling its neck back, then steadied again, gaze fixed on her. Maya didn't move. On her knees, drenched, Elijah pressed against her chest. She remained as still as carved stone. Only her eyes shifted, tracking the men as they argued, her mind cataloguing every detail. The tremor in the handler's voice, the restless twitch of the other officer's hand near his holster, the way panic spread like cracks through glass when certainty began to shatter. Elijah whimpered, the sound cutting sharp through the rain. Maya pressed her lips to his temple, whispering, "Shh, "Stay calm, baby. Mama's here." Her words weren't just for him. They were for herself, a mantra to hold the fear at bay. The second officer spat into the rain, voice rising. "This is bullshit. Call it in." The handler froze, eyes darting to him. "What?" "Call for backup," he shouted over the storm. "Something's wrong with that animal. We'll need more units." The suggestion hung heavy, louder than thunder. Backup meant escalation. More cruisers, more leashes, more eyes ready to brand her a threat. Maya's stomach twisted at the thought. She could already picture it. Headlights splitting the night, radios squawking, a wall of uniforms closing in. The handler swore again, slamming a hand against his radio. Static crackled, mingling with the hiss of rain. Unit 12 requesting. His voice was swallowed by a crash of thunder, so loud it rattled windows along the street. The shepherd jolted at the sound, ears flattening. Instinctively, its gaze snapped back to Maya. Her hand was still raised, palm steady, dripping with rain. She whispered softly, almost inaudible beneath the storm. "Bleib. Stay." The dog froze, its body trembling with conflict, then pressed its paws harder into the wet asphalt, as if anchoring itself to her words. The officers saw it, though they didn't understand. "Jesus Christ, why isn't it moving?" the second officer barked, his face contorting with anger that barely disguised fear. "You're letting her control the damn thing." "She's not," the handler snapped, though doubt flickered in his eyes. He pulled the leash again, harder this time, his boots skidding on slick pavement. But the shepherd resisted, claws digging, breath steaming. Its growl deepened, not toward Maya, but toward the pull of the leash. Maya's heart pounded so violently she thought it might split her chest. She felt the weight of her son, the heat of his small body, despite the cold rain. Every part of her wanted to scream, to run, to collapse beneath the impossible weight pressing down. But she did none of those things. Instead, she stared straight into the shepherd's amber eyes, refusing to break contact. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Elijah. It was about Reeves. It was about every soldier who had ever trusted a dog more than the men holding the leash. The rain intensified, turning the street into a river. Water ran in rivulets down her arms, soaking through her clothes, stinging her skin. Lightning tore the sky open, illuminating the tableau. A kneeling mother, a whimpering child, a dog torn between worlds, and two men shouting louder and louder to disguise the fear creeping into their bones. "Goddamn mutt's defective," the handler growled, fumbling with his radio again. "I'll put him down myself if I have to." Maya's chest tightened at the words. She knew that threat wasn't idle. In war zones, dogs that faltered were discarded, killed, replaced, tools, not comrades. But she had never believed that. She had seen too much loyalty in their eyes, too much courage in their silence. Her voice came low, almost drowned by the storm, but steady enough that the shepherd's ears flicked at the sound. "You're not broken. You're better than them." The dog whined faintly, the sound piercing the officer's shouts. Its head dipped, just slightly, its muzzle lowering toward the wet ground. "Christ almighty!" the second officer hissed, stepping back. "It's listening to her." "Shut up," the handler snapped, though his voice shook now, thin and brittle against the storm. He yanked again, desperation in the motion, but the shepherd didn't move. Instead, it planted its feet, rainwater splashing up as if the earth itself had chosen sides. Maya held her ground. Her knees ached against the concrete, her arms burned from clutching Elijah, but she did not falter. This was no longer about brute strength. It was a battle of willpower, hers against theirs, silent against loud, steady against desperate. And though she was outnumbered, drenched, exhausted, she realized something with startling clarity. They were the ones losing control, not her. The radio hissed again, the handler barking garbled words into it. But even as backup was summoned, the shepherd refused to move. Its eyes never left hers. The storm roared louder, lightning splitting the sky, thunder pounding like war drums. Maya pressed her cheek to Elijah's damp curls, whispering, "We'll survive this. We have to." And as the officers cursed, shouted, and scrambled for authority, the truth rang clear in the downpour. They were no longer in command. The storm had already turned the street into a battlefield of sound. The hiss of rain, the crack of thunder, the officers' angry shouts colliding with the heavy silence between Maya and the shepherd before her. But then, with a violent slam of metal against metal, the night shifted again. The second cruiser's door was wrenched open. Maya's head jerked toward the sound. From the shadows of the back seat came another shape, larger, wilder, surging forward with an energy that made the first shepherd seem tame. The leash snapped taut immediately, the handler dragging it into the open with both hands braced against the force. This one didn't hesitate. Its teeth flashed white against the storm. Lips curled so far back the gums shone. It snapped at the air, jaws clamping shut with an audible crack like bone splintering. Drool and rain mingled, dripping from its muzzle as it lunged against the leash again and again, snarling so viciously the sound cut through thunder. The officer holding it cursed under his breath, struggling to keep control. His boots skidded on the slick pavement, water splashing high around his ankles. Easy, easy, damn it. But the dog was beyond calm. Its whole body trembled with the desperate hunger to be unleashed, claws scraping furrows into the wet asphalt. Maya's breath caught. Elijah whimpered, his tiny fists pressing harder into her chest, as though he too felt the animal's fury. She rocked him gently, whispering, "Shh, baby, shh." But her own voice trembled with the force of what stood before them. This was not the hesitant recognition she had seen in the first shepherd's eyes. This was raw aggression, a storm within the storm. The handler yanked hard, straining, his face twisted in both frustration and fear. "We should have brought a muzzle," he spat, dragging the beast closer to the circle of light thrown by the cruiser's headlights. The German shepherd's paws splashed in the rising puddles, body coiled like a spring, every muscle begging for release. The other officer, still clutching the leash of the first dog, barked across the rain. "Get it under control, now!" "I'm trying," the handler snapped. "This one doesn't wait for commands. It lives for blood." Maya's chest tightened. She had seen dogs like this before, overseas. The ones pushed too far in training, broken down until only the predator remained. They were effective, yes, but dangerous even to the men who claimed to own them. She remembered handlers whispering late at night about which dogs could be trusted and which might turn on anyone, friend or foe. And now, one of those stood before her. Her knees dug deeper into the pavement, pain lancing through her legs. But she didn't move. Couldn't. Her entire being locked on the second shepherd's eyes, wild, burning, restless. There was no hesitation here, no thread of memory to tug on. If the leash slipped even once, it would come straight for her. She tightened her hold on Elijah, bending her head close to his ear. Rain soaked through the thin blanket, chilling his skin, and she whispered, steady but urgent, "Stay with me." Her words weren't just for him. They were for herself, for the memory of Reeves, for every part of her that wanted to collapse under the weight of this night. Stay with me. Don't falter. Don't give them the victory of your fear. The new shepherd lunged again, the leash jerking the officer forward so hard he nearly fell. The dog's snarl tore through the air, echoing off the houses that lined the street. Windows flickered with light as shadows moved behind curtains. Neighbors too afraid to step outside, but unable to ignore what was unfolding. Maya could feel their eyes, their whispers, even through the storm. But none of them knew who she was, what she carried inside her. To them, she was just a cornered woman in the rain, a baby clutched to her chest, two dogs bearing down. They didn't see the Marine. They didn't see the medic who had crawled through fire to drag men back from the edge. They didn't see the handler who had once whispered to dogs like these in languages not her own, forging bonds stronger than fear. But the second shepherd didn't care about the past. It only knew the present, only knew the command it hadn't yet been given, but desperately wanted. Its eyes glowed like coals beneath the flashing red and blue lights. Its breath steaming in the cold, every inch of it screaming for violence. Maya's grip on Elijah tightened until her knuckles ached. His cries rose higher, shrill against the storm, but she whispered again, forcing calm into her voice, even as her insides shook. "Stay with me. I've got you." The words steadied her. They always did. When Reeves had slipped from her grasp, she had whispered the same thing, though she hadn't been able to keep that promise. When Elijah was born, fragile and screaming, she had said it again, vowing this time she would never fail. And tonight, under the downpour, facing beasts and men who saw her as less than human, she said it once more. "Stay with me." The leash strained, officers shouted, thunder cracked overhead. The street vibrated with suspense, every heartbeat a countdown to something inevitable. Maya knew it then. This was no longer just about survival. It was about revelation, about proving that the woman kneeling in the rain was not weak, not cornered, not helpless. She was soldier and mother, bound together by scars and love, and neither beast nor man would break her. The second shepherd lunged again, harder this time, dragging its handler forward so violently he stumbled, barely catching himself against the cruiser's hood. The leash strained, taut as a whip, metal rings clinking under the rain. Its jaws snapped at the empty air between them, each bite loud enough to echo across the street. Maya's heart hammered. She could feel the vibration of Elijah's cries against her chest, the sharp tremor of his tiny fists clutching the edge of her jacket. Every instinct screamed to curl herself smaller, to shield him with her entire body, to let the storm swallow them whole. But then came another instinct, older, sharper, carved into her bones in places far from Maple Hollow. The desert rose up around her in memory, the sting of sand against her skin, the suffocating heat. The German syllables barked across training yards as shepherds launched forward and froze mid-air at a single word. She had spoken those words once, in fear and in authority, and dogs had listened. Not because of the power of language alone, but because of the weight of belief behind it. She drew a breath through the storm, her body trembling, but her voice steady. The word cracked through the night like thunder. The second shepherd's body jerked mid-lunge. Its paws skidded against the pavement, claws scraping sparks as it fought momentum. A sharp, confused whine escaped its throat. Not surrender, not yet, but hesitation. The leash snapped taut, the handler shouting curses, but the dog's eyes flicked, amber cutting to the figure kneeling in the rain. Maya's palm rose higher, fingers spread, arm firm, despite the burn in her muscles. She repeated the command, louder this time, every ounce of her memory fueling it. "Platz, down!" The shepherd's ears twitched violently. Its head jerked between her and the officer, torn between voices, between the leash that demanded blood and the tone that stirred something older, deeper. It whined again, a sound more desperate than angry, and its front paws slid half a step back. The first shepherd, still held stiff at her side, responded too. Its growl thinned, head tilting, eyes darting between Maya and its partner. Recognition lingered in its posture, a flicker of training buried under years of conditioning. The officers shouted louder, their rage cutting sharp through the storm. "Don't you listen to her!" one bellowed, spittle mixing with rain. "Attack, goddammit! Pull them in! Get them back under control!" the other snapped, boots splashing as he yanked his leash so hard the collar dug into the shepherd's neck. The dog coughed, snarled, but its body refused the full command. Its eyes remained locked on Maya, uncertainty glowing like embers in the dark. Maya's voice dropped low, almost drowned by the rain, but the tone carried weight beyond volume. It was the same tone she had used crouched in alleys overseas, when fear clawed at her comrades and chaos screamed for control. A tone not of panic, but of command. Zurück, back. Both shepherds shifted at once. The second dog's lunge broke into a stutter step, its front legs buckling slightly, as though caught between command and instinct. The first lowered its head further, ears pinned, circling half a step as if recalibrating its place in the world. Confusion rippled between them, their bodies restless, muscles twitching with conflict. They paced small, tight arcs, their eyes flicking back and forth between the dripping woman on her knees and the furious men gripping their leashes. Maya's chest burned with the effort to hold steady. Her arms ached, her legs were numb from kneeling on the wet asphalt, but she didn't falter. Elijah whimpered, pressing his face into her chest, and she kissed the crown of his damp curls, whispering, "Stay with me, baby. We're almost there." The storm raged harder, as if it too was caught in the conflict. Rain pelted against metal and skin. Thunder rattled the sky. Lightning turned the street into a silver war zone. And in the heart of it, the two shepherds circled like soldiers without clarity of command, their eyes flickering between present masters and the ghost of one they recognized more deeply. "Control your damn dogs!" one officer screamed, his voice breaking under the strain of panic. "I am," the handler shouted back, though his grip betrayed desperation. The leash slipped an inch, jerking taut again as the shepherd refused another pull. Maya's voice cut through their shouts, quiet but sharp, a blade in the rain. "Ruhig, easy." Both shepherds froze. Their ears flicked back, heads lowering slightly. Their breaths came harsh and steaming, but their bodies no longer surged forward with blind aggression. The officers gaped, disbelief shadowing their rage. Their authority was slipping, not because of weapons or force, but because of something they couldn't see. The unspoken recognition between a woman drenched in rain and the beasts they had tried to wield as tools. Maya felt it in her bones. The tide was shifting. The night had shifted. The two shepherds, meant to be weapons, no longer moved with singular obedience. Their bodies circled in tight arcs, confusion crackling in the storm, like lightning itself. Their ears twitched. Their eyes flicked constantly toward Maya, as if waiting for orders, not from the men holding their leashes, but from the drenched woman, kneeling in the rain. The officers saw it, and panic crept into their voices. "What the hell is happening?" one barked, tugging so hard on his leash the collar cut into the dog's neck. The shepherd coughed, snarled, but resisted, eyes fixed on Maya. She's doing something," the other stammered. His eyes darted between the dog's and Maya's outstretched palm, fury flickering with disbelief. "That's not possible. It's happening right in front of you." Their words weren't commands anymore. They were excuses, sputtered between bursts of thunder. For the first time that night, authority no longer sounded certain. It sounded frightened. Frustration erupted. One officer raised his baton high and slammed it down against the cruiser's hood, with a crack so violent it echoed like gunfire. The metal dented under the force, the sound ricocheting through the storm. Sparks of light flickered off the wet surface. The shepherds flinched. Elijah wailed against Maya's chest, the sudden violence sending a tremor through his tiny body. His cries pierced through the night, raw and helpless. Maya nearly buckled. The crack of the baton wasn't just noise. It was memory. In her mind, the sound wasn't metal on metal, but gunfire against barricades, explosions rattling the desert, radios screaming through chaos. She was back in the sand, back with Reeves bleeding out in her arms, back with the smell of cordite thick in her lungs. Her vision blurred, her chest constricting as the storm outside fused with the storm inside. Her knees wavered against the pavement, the weight of her child pressed down heavier, her body trembling with the threat of collapse. But then Elijah cried again, louder this time. The sound sliced through the fog of memory like a blade, not a scream of war, a baby's cry, her son's cry, the one voice in all the chaos that mattered. Maya blinked hard, forcing the battlefield back into shadow, pulling herself out of the desert and into the rain. She bent her head close to Elijah's ear, pressing her lips to his damp hair. Her voice came soft but steady, a whisper meant for him alone. "I've got you, baby. I'm here. Mama's here." The tremor in her body steadied. The storm of memory calmed, anchored by the fragile life against her chest. Elijah's whimper eased into soft hiccups, as though even he sensed her regaining control. She lifted her eyes again. The officers were circling now, rage replacing the cracks of panic. One jabbed his baton in her direction, spitting curses drowned by the storm. The other fumbled with his radio, barking for backup through static. Their fury wasn't just at her defiance. It was at the sight of their tools slipping from their grip, loyalty bleeding out of their control and into hers. The shepherds mirrored the shift. They snarled, paced, snapped their jaws, but their eyes kept returning to Maya. They were restless soldiers caught between two commanders, each heartbeat dragging them closer to betrayal. Maya drew a deep breath, her palm still raised, her voice calm but laced with steel. "Easy," she whispered again, the German syllables steady on her tongue. "Ruhig." The first shepherd's head lowered further. The second gave a sharp, conflicted bark, but didn't lunge. Both shifted their weight back, their circles widening slightly, not closing in on her, but on the men who pulled their leashes too tight. The officers saw it. And for the first time, their rage cracked with something deeper. Not disbelief, not frustration, fear. Maya felt it too, not as victory, but as the turning of a tide. The storm hadn't broken yet. Backup was coming, and violence still trembled on the edge of every second. But in this moment, in this fragile heartbeat of the night, she was not the one breaking. She pressed Elijah tighter to her chest, whispering again into his hair, "We're still here. We're still standing." The rain poured heavier, thunder shaking the air. But Maya's spirit stood taller than the storm. The cracks in their authority had begun to spread, and she knew, once cracks form, collapse always follows. The crack of the baton still echoed in her ears, But it wasn't just Maple Hollow's storm that haunted her. The sound had opened a door she never wanted unlocked, and memory poured in with ruthless clarity. She wasn't kneeling on wet pavement anymore. She was back in the desert. The night was blacker than ink, broken only by the white sweep of moonlight across ruined walls and the dull glow of fires smoldering in the distance. Dust clung to her tongue, heavy in her lungs, every breath scraping like sandpaper. The air hummed with tension, alive with the possibility of violence. She crouched behind a half-collapsed wall, rifle slung across her back, medical kit pressed against her hip. Around her, Marines whispered into radios, their voices tight, their eyes sharp. The mission was clear. Sweep the compound, secure the civilians, get out alive. But even the best plans unraveled in the dark. Beside her, a German shepherd strained against his handler's leash. His nose worked furiously, tail stiff, body coiled like a spring. Maya knew that look. She'd seen it a dozen times, the moment before instinct overrode everything else. The handler muttered a low command. The shepherd froze, head tilted, ears sharp against the silence. Then it moved forward, each step deliberate, scanning the air as though the night itself spoke a language only it could hear. Maya followed, heart pounding. Her boots sank into soft sand, the faint crunch sounding louder than gunfire in her ears. She gripped her kit tighter, praying they weren't walking straight into death. The dog stopped suddenly, muscles locking. Its body lowered into a crouch, head snapping toward a stretch of ground just ahead. The handler froze, pulling the leash taut. Maya's breath caught. "Tripwire," the handler hissed, his voice sharp with urgency. Her eyes darted to where he pointed, and there it was, thin, nearly invisible in the moonlight. A line stretched across the narrow path, rigged to a crude explosive half buried in the sand. Her stomach dropped. One more step, and they would have been gone, scattered across the desert like ash. The shepherd growled low, teeth bared not in aggression, but in warning. Its whole body trembled with the knowledge of danger. Maya's knees nearly gave way. She thought of Reeves, of the others, of how close they had come to walking into silence that no medic's hands could mend. Her pulse thundered, her throat dry, but her respect surged deeper than fear. The shepherd had saved them. Not a tool, not a weapon. A soldier. Maya knelt then, one hand brushing over the dog's head, steadying it even as her own body shook. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the desert wind. "You just saved us." The handler met her eyes, his expression a mixture of relief and awe. No words were needed. They all knew, without that shepherd, they would have been ghosts already. The memory spun forward. The mission continued, firefights breaking out, civilians pulled from the rubble, soldiers patched under the glow of flickering lamps. But it was that moment that anchored itself in Maya's chest, the moment when instinct and loyalty had stood between life and death. Back in Maple Hollow, the rain poured harder. Her eyes refocused on the present, on the shepherd circling before her, confused, torn between the men holding their leashes and the drenched woman who spoke in whispers they remembered in their bones. Her heart ached with the weight of memory. She had once trusted dogs with her life, and they had never failed her. And now, all these years later, she was asking for that trust again, not for her own survival, but for the fragile life pressed against her chest. Elijah stirred, his tiny cry muffled by the storm. Maya bent her head, pressing her lips against his hair. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "Mama knows. Mama remembers." The shepherd's growls thinned. Their eyes flicked back to her, not with the blind hunger their handlers demanded, but with hesitation, as though some ancient echo of loyalty had stirred. And Maya knew in her bones she wasn't just a mother fighting to survive. She was a soldier once more, standing with comrades who wore fur instead of Kevlar, but who carried the same courage she had trusted long ago in a desert of ghosts. The storm drummed against the pavement, but inside Maya's chest, another storm rose, not of thunder, but of memory. The crack of the baton, the shouts of the officers, the restless growls of the shepherds, all of it tangled with something older, something she had carried folded away for years. It wasn't gunfire or tripwires this time. It was paper. She saw it clearly, even as rain blurred her vision. The discharge packet, its edges creased, her name typed in black ink across the top. Words that ended a chapter of her life with all the warmth of a stamp on cold paper. "Thank you for your service." That was the line. Simple. Hollow. A closing statement for years of sacrifice. She remembered opening that envelope alone at her kitchen table, the desert dust still clinging to her boots, the ache of Reeves' absence like an open wound. She had stared at the page until the words blurred, waiting for something else. An offer of guidance, a phone number to call, a sign that the country she had bled for had a place for her once she put away the uniform. But there had been nothing. No job waiting. No community to fold her into. Just silence. Maya had written letters, not once, not twice, but many times. She had poured her words onto paper, the way she had poured blood into sand, asking for help, for transition support, for someone to recognize that survival overseas didn't mean survival at home. She mailed them to offices with names she trusted once: Veterans Affairs, state representatives, even the unit commander who had shaken her hand the day she left. No answers ever came, except one. A single envelope weeks later, stamped with an emblem that once meant pride. Inside was a form letter printed by machine, thanking her again for her sacrifice and wishing her success in future endeavors. No signature, no human hand, just ink. She had read it once, then again, then a third time, as though repetition would pull meaning from the void. But it didn't. It only deepened the hollow. The same nation that had taught her to lead dogs through chaos, to hold bleeding men together with trembling hands, to survive when others fell. That same nation discarded her like an empty shell casing. Now, kneeling in Maple Hollow with Elijah in her arms, the memory seared her like fire. The officers circling her shouted louder, voices cracking with frustration. One slammed the baton against the cruiser again, the sound ricocheting through her skull. Another fumbled with his radio, calling for backup that would soon arrive. Their fury pressed closer, trying to crush her beneath the weight of authority. But Maya knew something they didn't. She had already been crushed before, by silence, by rejection, by the letters that never came, and she had survived. The shepherds paced tighter circles, their eyes flicking between her and their handlers. Confusion rippled through their bodies, torn between leash and memory. She understood them. They were like her, trained to serve, discarded when inconvenient, repurposed into tools of fear. Her chest burned with anger that was not just for herself, but for them too. Soldiers in fur, treated as weapons instead of comrades. Her mind flashed back to the night she had pinned Reeves's tags into her pocket, her kit still sticky with his blood. The day after, she had written her first letter home, begging for help to transition, telling herself his death wouldn't be in vain. When no answer came, The weight doubled. And now, years later, the echo of that silence pressed on her chest, even as thunder rolled overhead. She looked down at Elijah. His damp curls stuck to her jacket, his cheeks wet with both rain and tears. He whimpered softly, fragile but alive, a life untouched yet by betrayal. Her voice broke the storm, steady despite the tremor inside. "They never answered me, baby. But you're the only answer I need." The shepherd closest to her whined again, caught in the pull of her voice. Its handler cursed, jerking the leash so hard the dog staggered sideways. The second barked, restless, but neither lunged. Their eyes betrayed uncertainty, shadows of memory sparking against training. The officers couldn't see it, but Maya did. She saw herself in their hesitation, in their longing for something truer than commands barked in anger. The baton slammed again, closer this time. Maya flinched, her vision flashing to the hollow letter folded in her drawer at home. But Elijah cried out, sharp and urgent, and she snapped back to the present. She kissed the crown of his head, whispering fiercely, "I won't let them take you. I won't let them decide our worth." The storm raged harder, but inside her chest something steadied. The silence of unanswered letters no longer crushed her. It fueled her. If the country had abandoned her, she would not abandon herself, nor the life in her arms. And as the shepherds circled, caught between rage and recognition, Maya knew this truth. Authority could be ignored, letters could be shredded, promises could be broken. But respect, the bond forged in blood and loyalty, could never be erased. The rain poured harder, sluicing off the cruisers, bouncing in silver ripples across the pavement. It plastered Maya's hair to her forehead, soaked through her jacket, and dripped onto Elijah's blanket until his tiny body shivered against her chest. She tightened her arms around him, shielding what she could. Her eyes burned, not from the water, but from the cruel truth pressing in on her. She had once worn a uniform that demanded respect. She had once been saluted by strangers in airports, her service thanked with quick smiles, her presence honored by words that felt heavy, even if they were spoken lightly. She had bled for that flag, stitched comrades back together under its name, whispered into the ears of shepherds who charged ahead so men could live. And now she knelt in the rain, branded not as a protector, but as a threat, not as a veteran, not as a medic, not as a handler, but as a black woman with a baby in her arms, cornered beneath flashing red and blue. The irony cut deeper than any wound she had carried home from war. She lifted her head, eyes narrowing at the two officers circling her like jackals. Their uniforms dripped, their boots splashed in the spreading puddles, their mouths spat commands they no longer controlled. Behind them, the shepherds circled too, restless, confused, eyes torn between fury and recognition. She thought of Afghanistan, of the time she had crouched in ruins with nothing but faith and training to guide her. Back then she had known who the enemy was. Back then the lines were brutal but clear. Now the battlefield was blurred. The men who saw themselves as protectors, the system she had once trusted, stood against her. The desert hadn't followed her home. The battlefield had simply changed its shape. She wasn't fighting insurgents in sand-blown alleys. She was fighting perception, prejudice, suspicion, baked into uniforms and sirens. She was fighting the way her skin was red as guilt, her silence as defiance, her very existence as a danger to be subdued. Lightning cracked overhead, white light spilling across her face. For an instant, the reflection in the cruiser window showed her not as she was now, but as she had been. Helmet strapped, eyes sharp, mouth set with determination. A soldier, a medic, a handler. And then the light faded, leaving only the drenched figure of a mother kneeling in the storm, clutching her child. The contrast stabbed deep. She whispered into Elijah's hair. Words carried more for herself than for him. "They don't see who I am, but you will. You'll know." The shepherd nearest to her whined, ears twitching. The handler cursed, yanking the leash, fury sharpening with every second of resistance. The officer with the baton slammed it again against the cruiser's hood, the sound ricocheting like gunfire, his own fear disguised as rage. Maya's chest tightened, but she didn't falter. The bitter irony of it all fueled her. She thought of the folded letter still in her drawer at home, the one that thanked her for her service and wished her luck. She thought of the rejection letters that piled after, the jobs that disappeared when employers saw veteran or single mother on her applications. She thought of neighbors who nodded politely, but never asked about the scars on her arms, the nightmares that shook her awake. And now the same country she had carried on her back through the desert looked at her as if she were the enemy. She laughed then, not loud, not mocking, just a short, breathless sound that broke through the storm. It startled even her. A laugh laced with exhaustion and fire, a laugh that said, "I see the truth now." The officers froze for a heartbeat, then snarled back with curses. "You think this is funny?" one shouted. No, it wasn't funny. It was tragic. Tragic that the loyalty of dogs carried more honesty than the men who claimed to own them. Tragic that the oath she had once sworn to protect had been forgotten the moment she stepped out of uniform. Tragic that a baby's cry wasn't heard as innocence, but as noise in the way of authority. Her arms tightened around Elijah until he whimpered, and she kissed his damp cheek, whispering fiercely, "Not you. They'll never define you the way they've tried to define me." The shepherds circled again, their confusion deepening, their eyes flicking more frequently to Maya. She could feel the fragile thread of recognition strengthening, could sense the shift in power with every beat of the storm. And standing in that rain, in that moment, Maya understood. The true battlefield wasn't overseas. It was here. It was home. It was in every glance that judged her before she spoke, in every order barked without reason, in every silence where answers should have been. She had once sworn to save lives in foreign sands. Tonight, she swore to save her own, and the life she held in her arms, on American soil. The bitter irony of it made her spine straighten, even as water streamed down her face. So, if this nation saw her as a threat, then so be it. She would be a threat, not through violence, not through fear, but through survival, through strength, through the refusal to kneel when unjust voices demanded it. Thunder roared overhead, drowning the curses of the officers. Maya's eyes burned with something sharper than pain. She had been abandoned, yes, but she was not broken. And in the storm, with Elijah's heartbeat pressed against hers, she realized something else. She would rather be feared as a fighter than erased as a ghost. The storm showed no mercy. Rain slashed the night in sheets so thick the world blurred into streaks of red and blue. Water ran down Maya's face, soaking the blanket wrapped around Elijah until it clung to his tiny frame. She pulled him tighter, her arms trembling from cold and fear, but she would not let him go. The officers had reached their breaking point. "On your knees," one bellowed, baton raised. "You're under arrest," the other shouted, hand hovering near his holster. The word kneel rang in Maya's ears, louder than thunder. She knew that position well. It had meant survival in war zones, shielding the wounded under fire. But here, in her own country, kneeling meant surrendering her dignity, her child, her very being to men who saw her as less than human. No. She had knelt enough for this nation. Tonight, she would not. The German shepherds paced between them, rain slicking their fur, eyes darting between jerking hands, and Maya's steady palm. "Kneel, or we'll set them on you again," one officer roared, yanking a leash so hard the dog coughed. Maya's voice rose over the storm, not loud, but steady, the kind of calm forged on battlefields. A single German word cracked the night like steel. Both shepherds froze. Their ears twitched, their heads snapping toward her, despite the furious pulls of their handlers. One barked once, sharp and guttural, then sat abruptly, splashing water around its haunches. The other whined, resisting, paws skidding before crouching low. The officers cursed. "What the? Get up! Attack!" But the shepherds didn't move. Their growls deepened, no longer aimed at Maya, but at the hands jerking their collars. Her palm stayed raised, fingers spread. Her voice softened, nearly swallowed by rain, but the dogs didn't need volume. They needed tone. Quiet. With me. Easy. With me. Both shepherds turned toward her. Recognition flickered like lightning, faint, but undeniable. Their growls shifted, protective now. For the first time, the officers faltered. Maya whispered again, lips brushing Elijah's damp hair. "Stay with me." The shepherds angled their bodies away from her, jaws bared at the men. Their tails stiffened, not in attack against prey, but in defense against threat. The officers shouted louder, voices cracking under thunder. One slammed his baton against the cruiser in frustration. The other barked for backup, static eating his words. The storm itself mocked them, drowning fury and rolling thunder, washing commands into nothing. Maya lifted her hand higher. Her voice was firmer now, commanding without shouting. "Back!" The shepherds stepped away from her, circling toward the handlers. Their growls rumbled like a drumbeat, flashing teeth whenever the men tried to drag them forward. Maya's chest ached. She had never wanted this, never wanted loyalty twisted into defiance. But she knew the truth. Loyalty could not be forced. It had to be earned. And tonight, hers outweighed the rage barking behind badges. Elijah whimpered, and she kissed his curls. "We're okay, baby. Mama's here." For the first time that night, she realized something. The storm was not against her. It drowned their authority, shielded her tears, lit her face with fire instead of fear. The storm was with her. The turning point came sudden. The larger shepherd lunged so hard its handler slipped. The leash tore free. The officer cursed, stumbling backward. But the dog didn't charge Maya. It pivoted, planting itself squarely between her and the men, hackles raised, tail rigid like a banner. The second shepherd yanked violently, slipping free as well. It joined the first, shoulder to shoulder, dark silhouettes framed by headlights and rain. Their growls vibrated through the asphalt itself. Maya's breath caught, not in fear, but in awe. Elijah whimpered again, but softer now. She kissed his temple. "It's okay, baby. You're safe." The silence that followed was heavy. Not peace, but the breath before something inevitable. Only the rain remained, pounding pavement, only the growls of the shepherds, low and steady. The officers froze. Batons lowered. Their weapons had turned against them. Authority no longer stood with them. "They're Protecting her, one officer whispered, disbelief twisting into fear. Maya straightened, still clutching Elijah, her body burning with exhaustion, but unbroken. Two shepherds stood like shields before her, not as weapons, but as guardians. Soldiers once more, but serving trust instead of fear. She pressed her lips to Elijah's hair. "See them. They're with us." The officers scrambled for words, but none came. Control slipped through their fingers like sand. It was not their voices that carried weight now. It was the storm, the growls, the fragile whimper of a child. And Maya, unbowed, unbroken, standing taller even from her knees. The shepherds didn't move, eyes locked on the men. The officers stepped back instinctively, boots splashing in rising water. For the first time all night, it wasn't Maya who looked cornered. It was them. Her chin lifted. The storm cloaked her in armor, each raindrop a shield. Thunder wasn't chaos anymore. It was her drumbeat. She remembered deserts, letters of rejection, nights of silence. She remembered surviving not with their help, but in spite of their absence. And now she survived again. Her voice carried across the storm, low but sharp enough to cut through their panic. "You don't own them. You never did." The words struck harder than any baton. One officer's voice cracked, "Shut your mouth." But it was thin, brittle, already broken. The shepherds growled deeper, unyielding. Elijah's fingers curled against her jacket. His heartbeat thudded against her chest, steadying her own. She pressed her forehead to his. "This storm is ours, baby. Not theirs. Ours." When she lifted her gaze, her eyes burned not with rage, but something steadier. Something the men could not meet. For years, she had been treated as invisible, her service forgotten, her silence mistaken for weakness. But tonight, drenched in rain, framed by lightning, she was seen, not on their terms, but on hers. And the men who had tried to break her now stood powerless before a mother who refused to kneel. The storm showed no mercy. Rain lashed the night in sheets so heavy, the world blurred into streaks of red and blue. Water streamed down Maya's face, soaking Elijah's blanket until it clung to his tiny frame. She pulled him tighter, her arms trembling from cold and fear, but she would not let him go. "On your knees," one officer bellowed, baton raised. "You're under arrest," the other shouted, hand twitching near his holster. "Kneel." The word crashed through her like thunder. In war zones, kneeling meant survival, ducking under fire, shielding the wounded. But here, on her own soil, it meant surrendering dignity. Her child, her very being to men who saw her as less than human. No, she had knelt enough for this nation. Tonight, she would not. The shepherds strained at their leashes, eyes flicking between jerking hands and Maya's steady palm. Rain slicked their coats, muscles rippling with tension. "Kneel, or we'll set them on you again," one officer barked, yanking a leash until the dog gagged. Maya's voice rose, not loud but steady, the kind of calm that carried weight on battlefields. A single German word cracked the storm. Both shepherds froze. Their ears twitched. Their heads snapped toward her despite the handler's furious pulls. One barked once, sharp, then sat abruptly, water splashing. The other whined, resisting before crouching low. The officers cursed. "What the hell? Get up! Attack!" But the dogs didn't move. Their growls shifted, not at Maya, but at the hands jerking their collars. Her palm stayed raised. Her voice softened, almost drowned by rain. But the dogs didn't need volume. They needed tone. Quiet, with me. Easy, with me. Both shepherds turned to her. Recognition flickered like lightning, faint but undeniable. Their growls deepened, protective now. For the first time, the officers faltered. Maya whispered into Elijah's damp curls, "Stay with me." The dogs angled their bodies toward the men, jaws bared, tails stiff, stance no longer predatory but defensive. The officers shouted louder, panic breaking through rage. One slammed his baton against the cruiser. The other fumbled with his radio, static devouring his call for backup. The storm drowned them out. Thunder rolling like artillery, rain washing their authority into nothing. Maya's voice cut through. "Back!" The shepherds stepped away from her, circling their handlers, flashing teeth whenever the men tugged. Her chest ached. She had never wanted this, not to pit loyalty against command, but she knew loyalty could not be forced. It had to be earned, and tonight hers outweighed the rage behind badges. Elijah whimpered. She kissed his curls. "We're okay, baby. Mama's here." And then it broke. The larger shepherd lunged so hard its handler slipped. The leash tore free. The officer cursed, stumbling backward, but the dog didn't charge Maya. It planted itself squarely between her and the men, hackles raised, tail rigid like a banner. The second shepherd ripped free as well. It joined the first, shoulder to shoulder, silhouettes framed by headlights and rain, growls vibrating through the asphalt. Maya's breath caught, not in fear, but awe. The silence after was heavy, not peace, but the kind that comes before violence. The officers froze, batons lowered. Authority no longer stood with them. "They're protecting her," one officer muttered, disbelief twisting into fear. Maya straightened. Two shepherds stood before her like shields, soldiers once more, but serving trust instead of fear. She kissed Elijah's temple. "See them? They're with us." The officer's words cracked like brittle glass, powerless against the tableau. The storm carried the weight now. Thunder, rain, the growls, the whimper of a child. And Maya, unbowed, unbroken, her chin lifted. "You don't own them. You never did." The words struck harder than any weapon. The men flinched. Their threats thinned into pleas. One cursed, his baton trembling. The other's voice cracked as he barked again for backup. But the storm answered instead. Lightning slashed the sky, illuminating the scene like a war photograph. Two shepherds braced, Maya drenched but tall, Elijah clutched to her chest, and two officers trembling with weapons they no longer trusted. Rage claw back. One officer, younger, his lips trembling with humiliation, reached for his holster. His hand hovered, then curled around the grip. The other raised his baton high, water streaming down its length. His jaw clenched, arm drawn back as though he could smash through the fracture in authority. Maya's breath caught. Her arms burned, her legs ached, but she stood straighter. The shepherds moved first. They stepped forward in unison, shielding her like a wall of muscle and fur. Their growls deepened, vibrating through the storm, louder than thunder. Their ears pinned flat, teeth bared, eyes locked on the weapons. The officer froze mid-motion. He didn't draw, not with two shepherds glaring, daring him to try. The baton trembled in the other's hand, his arm shaking. The closest shepherd snapped its jaws, flashing teeth. Maya felt the air crackle, the edge where violence teeters but holds. She kissed Elijah's damp curls, whispering, "Shh. It's okay, baby. Mama's here." Her hand rose again, steady, palm flat. "Blabe, stay." The shepherds rooted themselves, forming a barrier so complete she could feel their heat against her knees. The officer's rage curdled into desperation. "Control your damn animals! Stand down." But their voices rang hollow. They weren't orders anymore. They were pleas. The storm mocked them. Thunder split the night. Lightning carved the scene in merciless white. Maya defiant, Elijah clutched safe, the shepherds growling in unison, and two officers trembling with weapons they no longer believed in. Memory blurred into present. She remembered sandbag walls, artillery fire, comrades bleeding out beneath her hands. Shepherds had stood between her and death then, too. Now, here in Maple Hollow, it was happening again. Her vow came firm, binding itself into the storm. You will never see me broken, Elijah. Not tonight, not ever. Tears mingled with rain as she pressed her cheek against his. You won't grow up with fear in your eyes. You'll remember this night as the one your mother stood tall. Lightning cracked again, freezing the image like a photograph. Maya drenched, Elijah safe, the shepherds snarling and the officers shrinking back. Her whisper steadied the storm itself. Your first memory will not be terror. It will be strength. My strength. Our strength. The shepherds growled in rhythm, as if echoing her vow. The officers cursed, shouting empty threats, but their words fractured beneath thunder. One's hand slipped from his gun. The other lowered his baton an inch. Maya rose taller, every inch of her drenched frame unbroken. Her voice, steady as iron. You don't scare me. Not anymore. The shepherds snarled in agreement, and in that moment she understood. Authority no longer lived in their weapons, their uniforms, their shouts. Authority lived here, in the bond between her child, and two shepherds who had chosen trust over fear. The storm was hers now, and they knew it. The street dissolved into black glass, rain pounding, lights spinning into haze. Maya rocked Elijah gently, whispering, "Stay with me, baby. Just stay with me." His breath steadied, tiny fingers clutching her jacket. His heartbeat grounded hers. Her vow sealed itself into the storm. When you are old enough to remember, Elijah, you will remember that your mother never bowed. The shepherd's jaws snapped shut like punctuation. The officers faltered again, not from dogs' teeth, but from the sight of a woman unshakable. Rage had no place to land. Fear had no room to grow. Maya drew one long breath, eyes blazing as lightning tore the sky. And in that frozen frame, she stood unbroken, her son safe, two shepherds shielding her, and the storm itself bearing witness. The storm showed no mercy. Rain hammered the night until red and blue lights smeared across the street like blood in water. Water streamed down Maya's face, soaking Elijah's blanket until it clung to his tiny frame. She pulled him tighter, her arms aching, but she would not let him go. "On your knees!" one officer bellowed, baton raised. "You're under arrest!" the other shouted, hand twitching near his holster. "Kneel!" The word crashed through her like thunder. In war zones, kneeling had meant survival, ducking beneath fire, shielding the wounded. But here, on her own soil, it meant surrendering her dignity, her child, her very being, to men who saw her as less than human. No, she had knelt enough for this nation. Tonight, she would not. The shepherds strained at their leashes, eyes flicking between jerking hands and Maya's steady palm. "Kneel, or we'll set them on you again," one officer barked, yanking until the dog gagged. Maya's voice rose, not loud but steady, the kind of calm forged on battlefields. A single German word cracked the storm. Both shepherds froze. Their ears twitched. Their heads snapped toward her, despite the handler's furious pulls. One barked once, sharp, then sat abruptly. The other whined before crouching low. The officers cursed. "What the—" "Get up! Attack!" But the dogs didn't move. Their growls shifted, no longer at her, but at the hands jerking their collars. Her palm stayed raised. "Quiet. With me, easy. With me." Both shepherds turned to her. Recognition flickered like lightning. Their growls deepened, protective now. For the first time, the officers faltered. She whispered into Elijah's damp curls, "Stay with me." The dogs angled their bodies toward the men, jaws bared, tails stiff. Soldiers again, but in defense. The officers shouted louder, panic bleeding through rage. One slammed his baton against the cruiser. The other barked into his radio, but thunder swallowed his call. Maya's voice cut through. "Back!" The shepherds stepped away from her, circling handlers, flashing teeth at every tug. Her chest ached. She had never wanted this, not to pit loyalty against command. But she knew loyalty could not be forced. It had to be earned. And tonight, hers carried more weight. Elijah whimpered. She kissed his curls. "We're okay, baby." "Mama's here." Then the breaking point came. The larger shepherd lunged so hard its handler slipped. The leash tore free. But the dog didn't charge Maya. It planted itself between her and the men, hackles raised, tail rigid like a banner. The second shepherd ripped free too. It joined the first, shoulder to shoulder, growls vibrating through the asphalt. Maya's breath caught, not in fear, but in awe. The silence after was heavy. Not peace, but the pause before violence. "They're protecting her," one officer muttered. Maya straightened. Two shepherds stood before her like shields, soldiers once more, but serving trust instead of fear. She kissed Elijah's temple. "See them? They're with us." Authority had slipped. The storm carried weight now, thunder, rain, growls, a child's whimper, and Maya, unbowed, unbroken, her chin lifted. "You don't own them. You never did." The words struck harder than any weapon. The men flinched. Lightning slashed the sky, illuminating the scene like a war photograph. Two shepherds braced, Maya drenched but tall, Elijah safe in her arms, and two officers trembling with weapons they no longer trusted. Rage clawed back. The younger officer, lips trembling with humiliation, reached for his holster. His hand hovered, then curled around the grip. The other raised his baton high, rain streaming down its length. Maya's arms burned. Her legs ached, but she stood straighter. The shepherds moved first, stepping forward, shielding her like a wall of muscle and fur. Their growls deepened, louder than thunder. The officer froze mid-motion. He didn't draw, not with two shepherds glaring, daring him to try. The baton trembled. Maya felt the air crackle. She kissed Elijah's curls. "Shh, Mama's here." Her hand rose, steady. "Blabe, stay." The shepherds rooted themselves, a living barricade. The officer's words cracked like brittle glass. "Control your damn animals! Stand down!" But their voices were no longer commands. They were pleas. The storm mocked them. Lightning carved the tableau in merciless white. Maya defiant, Elijah safe, shepherds braced, and two officers shrinking beneath their own weapons. She hadn't wanted this. She'd buried the soldier beneath motherhood, beneath silence in a country that had forgotten her. She wanted only peace. But destiny doesn't ask permission. Tonight, it had dragged her back into the fight. She looked at Elijah's sleeping face, pressed into her shoulder. "I never wanted this, baby. But I'll do it. For you." Her spine straightened. Her muscles screamed, but her soul steadied like steel hammered in fire. She could not bow. Not with Elijah watching. The officers barked again. "Kneel! Put the kid down!" She almost laughed at the irony. "Don't make us do this." As if she had asked for any of it. Her voice was low, steady. I didn't choose this fight. But I won't run from it either. In her mind, comrades rose, faces streaked with dust and sweat, eyes burning with purpose. She remembered their trust, their silence, their last breaths. That same steadiness filled her now. A soldier fights to survive. A mother fights so her child can live. She bent her head, whispering into Elijah's damp hair. We'll make it through. I promise. The shepherds mirrored her stance, bracing like soldiers awaiting orders. Thunder cracked, and in its roar she felt the truth crystallize. You want a soldier? Her whisper cut through rain. You've got one. The officers shifted uneasily. They had thought her prey. They now saw a warrior reborn, armored not in steel, but in love, weaponized not by rage, but by resolve. Her hand rose slightly. Not a plea, not surrender. A signal. The shepherds understood. Their growls unified, vibrating like a drumbeat of allegiance. The storm pressed harder, rain slashing sideways. The streetlights flickered. Every shadow stretched long. The air was electric, the next breath poised to decide everything. Maya kissed Elijah's head, steadying him with the calm she forced into herself. "Last warning!" one officer shrieked. "On your knees!" She shifted, then dropped deliberately to one knee. Not frantic, not broken. Command. Elijah safe in her arm, her torso a shield. The shepherds tensed, awaiting her. Their eyes locked on her, not the men. Her voice cut sharp. "Sits!" Both dogs dropped into a firm sit, tails stiff. Confusion flashed across the officers' faces. Her next word struck like a blade. "Voran!" Forward. The shepherds surged into position before her, twin sentinels forming an unshakable wall. The officers cursed, fumbling with radio and leash. The shepherds didn't budge. Their focus had shifted entirely. Maya pressed Elijah tighter. "Bleib, Bei mir, stay, with me." The growls deepened, no longer torn between masters but unified. The men faltered, trembling. One's hand slipped from his gun, the other's baton sagged. Maya bent her head to Elijah, whispering, "See them? They're with us now. They'll keep you safe. Mama will too." The shepherds adjusted, claws scraping asphalt, bodies squared. She was no longer visible prey behind them. She was the commander they shielded. Thunder rolled overhead like a drumbeat announcing power's shift. One officer muttered in disbelief, "What the hell are you?" Maya lifted her gaze, drenched but steady. "You don't scare me." The men flinched harder than if she had shouted. Lightning split the sky, etching the scene into permanence. A mother kneeling but unbroken, a child safe in her arms. Two shepherds, shields of muscle and loyalty, and two officers trembling, stripped of authority. Their illusion shattered. The truth stood undeniable. For the first time that night, it was not Maya who was afraid. It was them. The rain did not ease. It hammered harder, as if the heavens demanded this moment be witnessed. Each drop struck like a drumbeat, steady and relentless, echoing the rhythm of a march. Maya shifted Elijah higher against her chest. His tiny hand curled into her jacket, clinging with the quiet desperation of an infant who knew nothing of guns or commands, only the heartbeat of his mother. She pressed her lips to his damp forehead. "We're moving now. Hold on, baby. Hold on." Then she rose. Her knees screamed, her shoulders burned, but her spine straightened like a blade. She was no longer the woman who had started this night. Hesitant, weary, hidden. She was something else now. The shepherds sensed it first. They stepped into formation without a sound, one on each side. Their growls softened into a steady warning, their bodies taut, eyes forward. They were no longer torn between two voices. They were hers. Maya inhaled once, slow and deliberate, and stepped forward. Water splashed beneath her boots. The shepherds mirrored her, paws striking the ground in unison. Together they moved as one, mother, child, guardians. The officers broke first. One stepped back, baton lowering as if pulled by invisible weight. The other's hand slipped from his holster. Their bravado dissolved in the rain, red and blue lights staining their faces like marks of fear. Maya didn't rush. Every step reclaimed ground they had tried to strip from her. Elijah's breath warmed her neck, his fragile rhythm steady against her heart. The storm roared overhead, but beneath it was silence, the silence of men realizing they had lost control. "Stay back," one officer shouted, his voice brittle, but he stepped away as he spoke. The shepherds bristled, their growls deepening. Maya lifted her free hand. "Ruhi, easy." They obeyed instantly. That swift obedience cut deeper than any snarl. The radio on a shoulder crackled, but neither officer reached for it. The illusion of command had broken. For years, Maya had carried invisibility, dismissed as a veteran, overlooked as a woman, underestimated as a mother. But tonight, with Elijah to her chest and shepherds at her side, she was impossible to ignore. She advanced through the storm, and they retreated. By the time she passed the first cruiser, weapons hung useless at their sides. A baton clattered against the hood as its wielder's grip gave out. Their mission had been to make her kneel. Instead, they backed away from her march. She whispered to Elijah, her voice tender. "See this, baby? This is what strength looks like. Not theirs. Ours." The night bore witness. The advance of a mother unbroken. The retreat of men who had mistaken her silence for weakness. The storm softened. Sheets of rain thinned into drizzle, delicate as breath. The heavens, satisfied, lowered their voice. Maya felt the shift. The fury had been her shield, but this hush was her crown. Elijah's breathing had evened, his fingers curled loosely at her collar. She kissed his damp curls. "We're almost through." The shepherds flanked her still, their occasional growls reminding the men, "We have not forgotten." The officers who had barked orders now staggered back like men swept in a tide too strong to fight. Authority sagged around them like soaked cloth. One tried to speak. "Call them off." But the words faltered. These dogs no longer belonged to him. The bond had shifted. The shepherds bared their teeth, growls vibrating so deep the men's knees buckled. Then came silence, heavier than thunder. Maya's boots splashed softly. Each step forced them back. She didn't quicken her pace. She didn't need to. The rhythm of her march was set by something greater, her vow, her guardians, her child. The red and blue flashes no longer screamed authority. They looked like ruins of power already lost. She saw no giants before her now, only men stripped bare, bravado drained, fear seeping into their pores. They weren't just afraid of the dogs, they were afraid of her. One stumbled, catching himself on the cruiser's mirror. His baton clattered into a puddle, metallic and hollow, like a gavel marking the end of judgment. The other muttered a curse, not anger, but desperation. Maya advanced. The shepherds matched her perfectly, their bursts of growls sending the men recoiling further. Elijah whimpered softly, and Maya soothed him with a kiss. "Shh, we're stronger than they'll ever know." The drizzle sparkled faintly now, gentler against her skin. It felt like respect. the storm bowing its head to the woman who stood unbroken. The men saw it too. Fear no longer masked by rain, it showed in the quiver of their lips and the twitch of their hands. They had entered the night, certain of power. Now they were hollowed, realizing fear cannot command loyalty, and arrogance cannot stand against truth. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't waste words. Her silence spoke louder than thunder. She was teaching, not only Elijah but the world, even these men, that strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it advances quietly, step by step, until arrogance has nowhere left to stand. Her boots splashed steady, each stride a verdict. Elijah's body was calm against her, soothed by her rhythm. "We're leaving this behind, baby," she whispered. "This night won't take us." The shepherds moved in sync, their eyes flashing at every twitch of the men. The lights spun across their wet coats, fractured, surreal. But Maya didn't look back. She fixed her gaze on the end of the street, where quiet darkness opened like a promise. Behind her, the officers stood frozen. Radios buzzed unanswered, weapons useless. Their authority dissolved into silence. One opened his mouth, but no words came. The other gripped the cruiser, chest heaving, but didn't step forward. They were paralyzed, stunned by the sight of the woman they had underestimated disappearing with their own dogs, guarding her like knights. Step by step, the flashing lights dimmed behind her. Maya's shoulders straightened further. Fear no longer clung to her. It had burned away in the storm. She had not broken. She had not kneeled. She had walked through their gauntlet and emerged stronger. The shepherds glanced back once, confirming the officers still stood rooted in place. Then they returned their focus to her, trotting with measured calm. Their choice was sealed. The night swallowed the sounds of cruisers and radios. All that remained was the rhythm of her boots, the patter of drizzle, and the steady breath of a child who would never know how close his first memory had come to terror. At the corner, Maya slowed once. She turned enough to see them, silhouettes against their own lights, weapons slack, eyes wide. Powerless, she didn't speak. Silence was heavier than words. She adjusted Elijah in her arms and turned away for good. The drizzle thickened into mist, curling around her like a shroud as she walked deeper into the night. The shepherds flanked her still, shadows merging with hers until they were one. Step after step, she disappeared into darkness. By the time the lights behind her faded to nothing, all that remained were rippling puddles and two men standing stunned in the wreckage of their own arrogance. Maya was gone, and the night had claimed her as its victor. The night grew quieter as Maya left the flashing lights behind. The rain had eased into a thin mist, clinging to her skin as though reluctant to let her go. Thunder rolled faintly over the hills, fading into memory. She tightened her hold on Elijah. He stirred once, then settled, his cheek pressed against her collarbone, trusting only the beat of her heart. He had no memory of snarls or shouted orders, only her warmth. That was all he needed. Her steps slowed as she turned down a narrow path toward the edge of town. Every muscle ached, but she didn't stop until the last red and blue glow vanished behind the mist. Only then did she pause. The shepherds halted with her, silent and steady, ears twitching at the night's smallest sounds. They weren't hers in name, but tonight they had chosen. In the storm, under the weight of fear, they had recognized her, not as handler or commander, but as someone who led with trust. For those moments, they had been hers. Maya crouched, brushing damp fur with her free hand. One shepherd leaned into her touch, pressing his head to her thigh. Her throat tightened. "You knew me," she whispered, and the dog's ears flicked as though he understood. Elijah sighed in his sleep, and she kissed his hair. This is what you'll carry, my son. Not the fear, but the strength, the loyalty, the love that held us tonight. They moved again, until the path opened into a clearing overlooking the valley. The storm clouds were breaking, silver-edged under the moon. Maya lowered herself onto the grass, cradling Elijah close. The shepherds settled at her feet, one lying down with a sigh, the other sitting upright, watchful as a sentinel. For the first time all night, she breathed deeply. Pine-scented air filled her lungs. Her heartbeat steadied with Elijah's quiet rhythm. She had survived. He had survived. And though the shepherds would return to lives not her own, tonight they had shown her something eternal, that bonds forged in truth never die. Memories pressed close. Sergeant Harper's weary grin, telling her, "These dogs don't follow fear, Maya. They follow heart." Corporal Diaz sneaking rations to K9s, whispering to them in Spanish like kin. Private Laramie, lost to a desert blast before 20. And the dogs, Jax, wiry and sharp-nosed. Odin, scarred but steadfast. Bella, fierce and tender, licking her trembling hands after a rescue. They were more than animals. They were soldiers, loyal until their last breath. Maya let the tears fall, mingling with the mist. She had carried them all these years, and tonight they had risen again, not in flesh, but in spirit, standing with her on that rain-slicked street, shielding her child. She brushed her lips across Elijah's damp curls. "They saved you," she whispered. "My brothers, my sisters, the dogs, they saved you tonight." One shepherd lifted his head, eyes glimmering in the moonlight. For a moment, she felt the unbroken thread that stretched across years and miles between soldier and hound, past and present, a bond not erased by silence or discharge, but alive in loyalty. Her gaze drifted to the horizon where storm clouds glowed silver, scars lit by light. Scars never vanished, but they could catch the moon. She thought of her comrades, of the shepherds who had given everything. Their trust had been her survival once before, and tonight it had saved Elijah. Gratitude and grief ached in her chest, heavy but whole. Elijah stirred, his small hand twitching. Maya kissed his temple. "You'll grow up knowing what loyalty means. You'll know it because it saved you before you could even understand." The shepherd sitting guard shifted closer, fur brushing her knee. She met his gaze and felt it again. That thread, that legacy. It wasn't just survival. It was an inheritance. Above, clouds thinned and stars broke through, faint but stubborn. They glittered like soldiers refusing to fade. Maya exhaled, her breath misting in the cool air. She wasn't just a mother or a veteran. She was both, bound by love and by memory. She whispered into the night, steady and unbroken. "Never underestimate us. Never underestimate the quiet, the broken, the forgotten. We're stronger than you think." The shepherd let out a low chuff, almost in agreement. Maya smiled faintly, stroking Elijah's back. The storm was gone now, leaving stillness. No sirens, no thunder. Only pine-scented air, the warmth of fur at her side, and the steady breath of a child whose life had been carried through the storm. And in that quiet, Maya understood. This wasn't just survival. It was legacy. Sometimes the most powerful stories remind us that loyalty, love, and quiet courage aren't found in medals or uniforms. but in the steady heartbeat of a dog who stands by our side. German Shepherds have shown us again and again that they are more than protectors. They are family, carrying a bond with us that words can barely capture. It's that bond that carries us through storms, through fear, and into healing. If you've ever felt your own dog watching you with that same quiet devotion, you know what I mean. There's something almost sacred in those moments, a reminder that we're never truly alone. If you'd like to explore a resource that helps deepen that connection, I've found something that may touch your heart the way it did mine. No pressure, of course, just something worth looking at if you want to walk a little closer with your own four-legged friend. In the end, it's simple. Love them well, listen to them, and they'll teach you what loyalty really means. And maybe that's the greatest gift we can give back, to honor the bond they so freely offer us.